Hello everyone, so in this tutorial I'm going to show you how you can get information about the location of a user based upon their IP address. So in a first example I'll show you how you can do this using JavaScript running in the browser, so without the need for any back-end programming, and in a second example I'll show you how you can do this by looking at the contents of a database on your own server. So using only front-end JavaScript, it's not actually possible to determine the IP address of a user. That information is only available on the back end. But what you can do is effectively outsource this process to a third-party server that will do this for you. So this is one example of a free service that you can use to get the IP address and location of a user. So just in case you can't read the address up there, it's ip-api.com. So the way it works is you make a HTTP request to this API and it's going to return to you as a response the information about the user. So if we take a look in the API documentation, we probably want the response format to be JSON because that's easiest to work with, and then it's very simple to use. All that you need to do is to make a GET request to this endpoint and then process the response. So to make the request, I'm going to use the native fetch API. So in case you're not familiar, you just call fetch and then the endpoint you place in the parentheses as a string. Now what will be returned to you is an object with a readable stream attached to it. So what you want to do is read that stream. So for that use res.json, and fetch is promise based. So to access the result of a promise, use the special then syntax, and then you insert a function in there, and the parameter is going to be the object that you receive back, and then you want to apply res.json to it. The return value within that then method is then available within the next then method, which in this case is going to be the readable stream, and I'm going to log that to the console. So this will actually be the data now that is returned from the readable stream. So you can see it's returned to me a lot of information about my location. So it's been able to detect my IP address, and on that basis the country that I'm located in, the city, and it also gives me latitude and longitude values. These aren't always that accurate because this isn't using geolocation or anything, but it will give you a rough idea of where a user is located. So if you wanted to print some of this information to the page, all you would need to do is access the property values within the res object. So for example, if I wanted to print the IP into the IPL element, I would want to set the text of that to res, and the property name for that is query, and then for the country the property name is country, and finally for the city the property name on the res object is city. So now if I refresh the page, you can see that it's detecting my location and printing it to the DOM. So what I'm going to do to test this is to start my VPN and simulate a request coming from a different location, from a different IP address, and see whether this is correctly detected by the third-party service that I am using. So I'll start my VPN here. See, it's simulating Atlanta in the United States, and when it connects it's going to give me an IP address. Now if I refresh my HTML, so it's now detecting my location as Atlanta, and the IP address is now the new public IP address that's appearing when I make requests while I'm running this VPN. The problem with this solution is not that it doesn't work, but that for it to work you are sending user data to a third-party service for processing. Now I'm not an expert on privacy laws, but if you want to maximize the privacy for your users, then you don't want to send their information to a third-party server, you want to keep it on your server. So what I'm going to show you next is how you can do this using NodeJS running this on your own server so you can process the information without it leaving, and you will get similar results to a third-party service. Okay, so in case you're unfamiliar with Node.js, what you have to do is download and install it on your computer. Once you've gone through the setup steps, then you'll be able to start using Node.js from the command line. So I'm going to be using Windows PowerShell. Now, if you're not sure if Node is installed, then you can just type node -v, and that's going to return the version number if it is installed, or an undefined if not. If it's undefined, then you need to install the package. Okay, so I've already created a folder on my desktop where I'm going to run the Node server locally. So in order to set that as the working directory, I'm just going to drag and drop that folder. That's going to give me the path to it. Now I'm in that folder. Best practice is to create a new Node project, npm init flag y. That's going to create a new project accepting all of the default settings, so you don't have to press return through all of them. So we'll return to the server again in a moment. What we're going to be doing there is checking the IP of a user against a database we're going to download. So let's first of all download that database. So a service that you can use for this is maxmind. So it's maxmind.com, and once you're on their page, you want to go to the geo IP services, and then you want to go to the databases here, so the geo IP2, and I'm going to select country. Now there's a paid version which is more accurate, or there's a free version which still works but is a little less accurate, so I'm going to click on the free version. So to be able to download the database, you have to register with maxmind. So you don't have to give out too much information, no credit card details. This is the free version. So once you've completed that, you'll be able to download the database. So once you've signed up, you can go to download databases on your account page, and we are going to be downloading the country file. So geolite to country, and you get some different formats for the download. Probably the best version is to download the gzip, and then you need to extract the file from that, which is going to be a .mmdb file, so that's the database. So I'll start the download and open the download folder. So it's only about 3 megabytes, not too big, and it's very well zipped, so you want to use something like 7-zip to get at the contents of it. So I'm going to extract the contents of it, and you need to extract contents twice actually, because it's twice zipped. So I'll extract here again, and now you get the folder. Inside there you have the database file. So I'm going to take this database file, copy it, and I'm going to place that inside the folder on my desktop where I installed the Node project. Now back on the Maxmind website, they provide some code snippets that allow you to start interacting with the database that we just downloaded. So if you hit the developers tab and go to the portal, and then for geolite 2, view the docs, and it's geolocate and IP, databases, and this gives you some instructions here. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to install this client library. So I'm going to simply copy this line here and use that in the terminal. That's going to install this package for me. So give that a moment. So while that's happening, let's go back to the guide. So once the package has downloaded, you can make a query to the database. And the way you do that is by first of all importing the package that you downloaded into your project. So do that at the top of your script, and then you can use functionality available on this reader object to make the query. So in this example here, I'll try to make it a bit bigger so that you can see it. The IP address is actually being hard coded there. And the reason is that this package does not automatically detect the IP address of a user. You have to feed an IP address into it, and then it will resolve the location on that basis. So I'll show you how you can do that in a minute, but for now, let's just stick with this example code with the fixed IP address. Now in Visual Studio Code, I've added the folder on my desktop to the workspace, and I'm going to create a new JavaScript file called app.js. And inside here, I'm going to paste that code that was from the MaxMind website. So I already installed the MaxMind package that we're importing at the top of this script, but what I still need to specify is the path to the database that I downloaded. So I'm going to change this path to the database to the path on my system. So it's actually in the same folder as app.js. So all I need to do is specify // this folder and then the name of the database. Now there is one change I need to make to this script before running it, and that is to change this method here. So I don't want to call city on the reader, I want to call country on the reader. I didn't download the city database, I have the country database. So returning to Node, I will run the app now, and you can see that it's returning the location of the IP here as US. So obviously the IP address that they gave in the example code points to a US IP address. If I exchange that IP for my own one, and I run this one more time, you see that it's now detecting this IP address as located in Great Britain. But in practice, this still isn't how we do it because we're still hard coding the IP address. We want to actually detect the IP address of the user without having to enter it manually. So what I'm going to do in the code is to create a basic HTTP server. So I'm using the native HTTP library in Node. You don't have to download and install that, it's just available in Node. And I'm creating a server here with a request and a response, and that response is going to end after I've executed some code here, and all that code is going to be is exactly what I was doing before. And I need to import the package. I'm going to import that at the top of the script there. So now we're doing exactly the same as before, except this code is being executed when a request comes in to port 3000 on localhost. So if I start up my server, node app, and I make a GET request to port 3000 localhost and look at the output, you see it's detecting that the IP is GB, but I'm still not detecting this dynamically, that's still hard coded. So what I'm going to do to make life a little easier here is install another package available via npm. So it's simply called the IP package, and all you need to enter in the terminal to install it is npm install IP. So I'll do that now. Now while that is downloading, this is the syntax we need to use this package. So you need to import it at the top of your script. So I'll enter that code there now. And then to get the IP address, I just call the address method on the IP object that's been created by this import. So I'm going to enter that code inside of my server. So now when a request comes in, this address method is called. I'm going to save the result of that as user IP. And instead of this hard-coded IP now, I'm going to enter that value. Now what I'm going to do before running this code is do a console log of the user IP so we can see what value that has. Now back in PowerShell, I'm going to go to the folder and run the server once again. Need to make a request to localhost 3000. Now this hasn't worked, and the reason is that the IP address that's been detected is my local IP address because I'm running this locally. So this IP address, my local IP address, This is just for my local network. It's not my public IP address, so it's not found in the database, and that is what the error we get back says. It says that this IP address is not in the database. So unfortunately for testing, to get your public IP address, you have to make contact with an external server, which isn't the case in this example. So for testing, I would advise just using a hard-coded IP address here. When you run this code on an external server and you make a request to it, it is going to detect your public IP address, and then you can change this hard-coded value back to the user IP value. So this is the second and more privacy-friendly way that you can detect the location of a user based upon their IP address. And that is actually it for this tutorial. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please consider hitting the like button down below this video. And if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.